Hello, a very warm good morning to all of you and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to today's the Hindu Newspaper Analysis, where we shall be taking a look at the important articles which have appeared in today's the Delhi edition of the newspaper for 11th of October 2023. So let us take a look at the topics that we are going to hold a discussion for. So in total, we are going to have a discussion for 7 topics. Out of them, 4 of the topics are those that we are going to discuss slightly greater in detail for an analysis perspective, for your relevance, both for the concept building as well as understanding for the mains level of examination. Now, amongst the topics that we are going to hold a detailed discussion about is women want change, society wants change. This is an argument for the Women's Reservation Bill which has been passed very recently and why that was a must required thing that needed to be done. So this is going to be relevant for your GS paper 2. It has appeared in the editorial section, that is in page 6. Then the second article, the Maldives, the evolution of a democracy, again in GS paper 3, that is where it is relevant for. Now, the recently held elections in Maldives have been pegged by the various different media houses as a fight or a kind of a football match between China and India, where the new government, the incumbent government, basically has got a pro-China policy. So we are going to discuss that slightly in detail. So that is relevant in GS paper 3, which has appeared in page 6, again the editorial section. Now then, in page 7 has appeared a detailed article about the need for evidence-based traditional medicine. It talks about the various different lacunae which does exist in our traditional medicine systems and what is it that we can do in order to make it much more reliable and also more dependent on scientific advancements and various different empirical evidences indicated by scientific research. This is also going to be relevant for your GS paper 3. Then impact of Claudia Goldin's work, who has been awarded the Nobel Prize for Economics. Now, what is it that she specialized in? Slightly we will talk about that, and that will highlight the idea about, again, the importance of women's participation in the labor force and the trend that it has indicated for the past couple of centuries. Now, this work has been done primarily with the American economy in mind, but that also gives a kind of a mirror reflection for the various different competing economies. As countries such as India, we basically move from agrarian to industrial to a service level economy. We have a lot of things that we can learn from her findings. So that is again relevant for your GS paper 3. Now, 3 of the articles we are going to discuss briefly for your prelims perspective. Tele-MANAS seva, that was for the mental health. What is it? So that is something we are going to discuss. Then NBFCs have also been put under the PCA regime, and the space tech industry and the downstream benefits of the space tech industry. What do we mean by downstream benefits? That is again something that we are going to focus upon. So without further ado, let us initiate the discussion for the first topic of the day, and that is women want change, society needs change. Now, as already highlighted, this is relevant for your GS paper 2. Now, before talking about it, what does that article exactly infer about, or what is the pretext in which the article has been written? So the article basically talks about the importance of the Women's Reservation Act now that it has been passed by both the houses, given the ascendance. So it has become a kind of an act. So that Women's Reservation Bill, the importance of it in forwarding and furthering the right of women across the various different sections of the society. That is what this article is about. Now, the article basically starts by holding its premise based upon the evidences indicated by the Global Gender Gap Report. Now, the Global Gender Gap Report indicated or released by World Economic Forum periodically. Now, that report has indicated that it would take close to around 139 years for the women to gain parity across the various different sections of society, given the level of inequality that they are facing across the world. And when it comes to populous countries such as the countries of South Asia like India, now in these countries, it is expected to take up till 150 years for the woman to gain a kind of a gender parity, a kind of a gender equality. Now, in that background, this particular Women's Reservation Bill can basically pose as a beacon of hope, can pose as a beacon of light, as a kind of an affirmative action which will induce a greater labor force participation and also better political participation and better political representation along the way. So here, let us take a look at the present status. So the present status, as already reiterated, highlighted by the Global Gender Gap Report, which is released by World Economic Forum. By the way, this is going to be relevant for your prelims. Report-based questions are oftentimes asked, but we'll have a separate slide for this report itself so that you can focus upon the relevant areas for prelims. Has indicated that as per the current trend, it might take close to around 139 years to gain parity, and for countries 131 years to gain parity, and for countries such as India and other populous nations, it can take 149 years. Now here, since that discussion about the women reservation bill has been made public, there has been a lot of argument and counter arguments going forth and back regarding the importance, the relevance and the requirement of providing reservation. Now there have been certain arguments which have been provided that why women should not be given certain amount of reservation. Now here, if we analyze the arguments which are being provided for against the reservation aspect, they are that if we provide reservation to women, it will kill competency, in the sense that in a way we are going to reserve seats for the people who might not deserve it, and thereby we are basically going to select some of the ineligible candidates. That is what competency here refers to. But here also the counter argument which can be made, and which has been made in the article as well, is the fact that the competency aspect of women to be decided on this is simply inadequate, because you have to understand that people from different backgrounds, and when it comes to women, now women have faced and have been facing various different types of deprivations throughout the various different generations and in various different strata sections of the society, regardless of the caste, regardless of the religion, regardless of the region of the country. It is the women folk who are discriminated against. Right? When we refer to them, there also the discrimination is very, very apparent when we refer to women as the weaker sex. So in face of that discrimination, it is absolutely unfair to expect that all the women from all the various different backgrounds will have the same educational standards, etc. But all they need is a chance. And as the article also argues, that when men and women have been given equal parity and equal opportunity, the evidence indicates to us that there has been a greater result in terms of the success ratio, in terms of the number of women who are graduating, the number of women who are completing the entirety of the school tenure, as compared to the male counterparts. They have a penchant to achieve a greater degree of success. So that holds the argument against the competency point. Now, other argument against reservation is also that it will bring some amount of inefficiency. But mind you, all these arguments against the aspect of women's reservation are the same arguments which had been made and which are continuously being made about the very basic nature of providing reservation at all. But here you have to understand that at this point of time, equality is a very far-fetched idea. Equality in terms of treatment, equality in terms of opportunity provided to women, equality in terms of the various different perspectives and opportunities going ahead into the future, that is again something which is not possible in the present day and age. So how can we provide that? Our eventual aim should be that 50% of our population should have the equal opportunity and equal footing as compared to the male population of the entirety of the world or the country, whichever sample size that you consider. But here, equity or the role in leadership, role in political aspect, that is very much required. And for that, you do need that reservation, because it is not easy for women from various different backgrounds to make their mark. And this is something which is very apparent by looking at the political representation that we have for the women and from the side of the constituency of women across the various different legislations and parliament. Now, and not only for India, but across the world, they are the ones discriminated against. Now here, when we talk about the need for it, you have to understand that despite the universal adult suffrage, that is, being given the right to elect your own leader, everybody has got the equal right in our country, that we have, for example, the proportion or the weightage of vote for a male member is equivalent to the weightage of the vote for a female member. So we have the universal adult franchise, universal adult suffrage, where every individual is accountable and responsible for electing their leader. But still, the role of women has been abysmal and very minimal in shaping the political discourse of the country. And that is oftentimes apparent in the forms of the various different forms of violence, very vicious forms of attacks, and malicious different types of allegations which are leveled against women for different strata of the society. So that needs to be understood, that despite the right to vote, they do not have the right to decide the future of the country. It is only a recent phenomena where in various different electorates, be it the state election, be it even the national election, the women voters are considered to be as a vote bank. But that is a very recent phenomena. And that is why the various different governments, they are actively pursuing various different policies in order to attract the women vote by either giving various different services like gas cylinders, etc., or depositing money in their account, making travel free. So it is only recently that the women electorate is making its voice felt. But for a long period of time, that was not the case. Now, political participation is very, very tough still and significantly full of prejudices. Their rise to power, their ascendance to power is filled with various different types of prejudices that are leveled against them. Oftentimes that is so very discouraging that it basically puts them out of the political race in many of the areas. And we have very few examples of women leaders across the world who have basically taken the limelight. For example, the New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. Now, she became Prime Minister at the age of 37. Now, that is something that we cannot expect to be happening in a country like India. But to be fair, at the age of 37, we do not generally expect any even male members to become Prime Minister. So that is a kind of a political discourse, but there also the field is leveled heavily against the women leaders. And we have certain examples. For example, the previous or the ex-Prime Minister, late Srimati Indira Gandhi. Now she became the Prime Minister, but the article basically argues that, look, when the time came after the demise of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, it is not as if Indira Gandhi was considered to be the immediate successor. Right? Despite being active in politics, she was not considered a successor. It was only after some years that she found her way to power. But contrarily, on the other hand, as soon as the sad demise of late Srimati Indira Gandhi happened, immediately, despite the fact that Rajiv Gandhi was not a part of the political spectrum of those days, he was considered to be a natural successor. So that in itself indicates to you the kind of bias that the society generally has for the women leaders and their upward mobility. You would have seen even recently when the president, when she was elected to the office, the various different types of remarks and allegations and various different types of insults which were hurled upon her, not by the some other ignorant public, but by elected members of the legislature and elected members of the parliament. So even at the level of the elected representatives, the acceptability level is not at all there. So that again highlights the need for providing that reservation. And there is a significant lack of women in leadership role. Even if there is some political participation at basic level, but when it comes to the leadership role, women are generally not considered. It is considered to be a kind of a vulnerability for women and a kind of a weakness that she will bring about to the leadership role. Whereas the historical evidences, they indicate something quite to the contrary. Now, here, women from privileged background make it from the top. That is the evidence from the history. Now, what it tells us, that if we analyze the pages of history, it indicates to us that those women leaders who have made it to the top, very few amongst them, it is very rare that basically many of them would have come from underprivileged background. Majority of them, they receive top grade education, top quality upbringing, and that is why their worldview, as is argued by the article, their worldview is very different. Their worldview is not that of a discriminated section of the society, and that is why the present political leadership, as the article argues, that represents a kind of those women across the world who are making it to the top of the political spectrum. They are representing women from the top tier or the top strata of the society rather than the underprivileged section. So that needs to be rectified, right? Now, it also argues that it has been a failure of women leaders for the cause of women. And this basically reinforces the age-old saying that you would remember, patriarchy is reinforced by the women members of the society. And this has been the argument going back almost couple of centuries, that when we think about and when we talk about the patriarchal mindset, it is basically something which is reinforced at the level of the family, at the level of the society, quite significantly by the women members of the society. So this article also argues in that favor, but in terms of the political representation. It talks about the fact that when women leaders, when we take a look at the women leaders and when we look up to them to bring the other section of the society at a level of parity, the problem is that for those women leaders, they have a kind of a general feeling that what they have done, what they have achieved is completely on their own, and they have never had any kind of privileged background, and they basically think of the other women folks as the weaker people, and thereby there is a lack of empathy. They think that the other women, they are not able to utilize their potential, and that is why they are lagging behind. So it basically highlights again the inequality in terms of even the women section of the population when it comes to their own political representation. Now, regressive views of the society is upheld by both men and women. And that was quite apparent. That has been quite apparent when you take a look at the parliamentary debates. Now, parliamentary debates are supposed to be erudite, are supposed to be significantly one of those mechanisms or tools by which awareness can be raised. But the last time, or the previous experiences of the introduction of Women's Reservation Bill, that indicated something quite to the contrary, where you had members and very senior members of parliament of various different political parties. They talking about the fact and also passing derogatory remark that only a certain kind of woman, a stereotypical kind of woman, they will end up gaining from women reservation. They basically are again talking about the hierarchical aspect of the women population in the society, that the top tier, the top strata of educated women, only they will gain from women reservation and the rest will not. This reservation, the article argues, is aimed at changing that mindset. Even after passing of this women's reservation bill with significant amount of majority from both houses of parliament, still you would have come across arguments by members of various different political parties that how only a certain kind, where they describe women in terms of their hairstyle, how they upkeep themselves, that only those stereotypical women are going to benefit. And that tells you about the regressive mindset which has percolated so deep within our, not only the society, but also our elected representatives. And how do we get rid of that mindset? By ensuring there is a greater visibility, greater participation of women at each and every level of political participation, at each and every level of society. Now that will not only bring about aspirations for the future, that will set many role model examples which will be significantly visible going ahead into the future. So that is what this article is about, that what are the arguments against the Women Reservation Bill and why the need for it? What is it that can be done going ahead? Now here, the aspect which is relevant for your prelims, where you can pick up certain fodder material for your prelims as well, is the aspect of Global Gender Gap Index. Now this is basically released by World Economic Forum. Okay? That is the one which releases this. Now, here you have to understand that what this index consists of. So, benchmarks countries on their progress towards gender parity in 4 key dimensions, and that are basically economic participation and opportunity, educational attainment, health and survival, and political empowerment. It is on the basis of these that basically the report or the index is generated. On each of these indices, you have a marking given between 0 to 1. Right? Now, where 1 shows gender parity and 0 is complete imparity or completely inequality which is prevalent. So that is something that you need to understand. Iceland is the one which has got a significant amount of gender parity. In general, the Nordic nations, the Nordic countries, that is the Northern European nations, when we talk about the region of Denmark, when we talk about Finland, Norway, Sweden, Iceland, these are the countries which generally indicate a greater female labor force participation, a greater political representation as well. And that has got to do with the cultural aspect as well in those areas. And that has got to do with the basic geographical aspect of the region, the hardships of that region, which has always, throughout the pages of history, ensured that women's participation in the labor force, in the workforce, is a must for survivability. And that is something which is indicated even today in providing the gender parity. So this is something that you can extract for your prelims. Now, moving on to the next article. And that article has been in significant amount of debate, discussion, not only in our media houses, but also in the Western media houses. And that is the change of government in Maldives. Now, Maldives are southwestern or southern neighbor across the Indian Ocean. Now, it holds significant amount of relevance for India, in the sense that significantly almost a decade and a half back, you had increased amount of Chinese presence which was felt. And Maldivian state as well as the public perception in Maldives was increasingly turning anti-India. And China, whenever it gains or basically senses an opportunity, it loses no time in gaining a large foothold in that area, be it deployment of defense vessels, naval vessels, etc. So it had become a concern for India. Over the past decade almost, India has been working relentlessly behind the scene in order to develop a kind of a cordial relationship, and where from the side of the Maldivian government you also hear and you would have heard multiple times about the India First policy, where the Maldivian government had made it public that we will not do anything which is going to antagonize India in the long run or even in the mid to the short run. And that antagonized basically China. Now, the election has been held and basically a new government is being elected to power, and that government has had a public India out policy, where global geopolitical agendas have made their way into the electoral fora and the electoral debates. And that is very surprising for a country like Maldives, having 1,000+ small islands. Now, in that island nation, having that India out policy as a public policy and then winning an election on top of that, that has attracted the attention of the global media, where they are saying this or terming this as a victory of the Chinese policy over the Indian policy. Now, this article basically argues that, look, it is not as black and white as the media houses are basically decrying it about. There is a lot more to an election than simply an agenda about whether China should come in or whether India should come in. And we have to take a look at that particular electoral process very objectively, right? So this is going to be relevant for your GS paper 2. Okay. Now, here, before moving ahead with the article, let us analyze a brief history or the democratic progress and the democratic history in Maldives. So here, one of the most popular or the most significant leaders of Maldives has been Maumoon Abdul Gayoom. Abdul Gayoom, who was a particular proponent of the importance of Indian Ocean and the strength and unity that the countries in the Indian Ocean should possess. Remember, it was Abdul Gayoom who basically had made the very famous statement that the 1800s belong to the countries across the Atlantic in terms of developmental parameter. The 1900s belong to the countries of the Pacific, across the Pacific in terms of developmental parameters. It is the 20th and the 21st century which is going to be the century for the Indian Ocean countries. And Abdul Gayoom basically was a strong proponent that basic naval deployment, trade, etc., that is something which needs to be promoted, and people-to-people connect need to be promoted in order to bring prosperity in the otherwise backward nations around the Indian Ocean. So Abdul Gayoom was very prominent. He ruled for a considerably long period of time, from 1978 to 1990. It was during the reign or during the administration of Abdul Gayoom where different political parties, they started rising up, and you had an establishment of a kind of a multi-party democracy which happened during that period of time. Now, multi-party system under new constitution did evolve under him. That then he was basically, after various different types of caretaker governments, etc., you had Muhammad Nasheed, who became the first directly elected president. Now, Muhammad Nasheed, he held a pro-India stance. Significantly throughout his political career, he has held a pro-India stance, and that has always been good and cherishable for India. But he was followed by Abdullah Yameen, who presently has been incarcerated and is in prison for charges of corruption. Now, Abdullah Yameen was known for a very ardent pro-China policy. He was strongly, and he has strongly been arguing about the involvement of China in Maldivian policy in the development of Maldives as well. So he has been the most pro-China leader in the history, in terms of the electoral history and the democratic history of Maldives. Now, that caused significant amount of anxious moments across the Ministry of External Affairs and South Bloc in New Delhi. And New Delhi had been working significantly in the backstage, in the back scenes, in order to improve the relationships. And basically, Abdullah Yameen was followed by Ibrahim Soli. And Ibrahim Soli became the architect of India First policy. Basically, during the reign of Abdullah Yameen, India had been antagonized to such an extent that even for basic aspects and basic requirements, Maldives would prefer China. So India stopped giving any kind of aid, any kind of significant help. And when you have government to government relationship which start going sour, then people to people connect also is something which is eyed with great amount of suspicion. People basically are not interested to travel to these countries anymore. And Maldives is an economy which depends significantly on tourism, and Indian tourists, they form a bulk of those tourists who visit Maldives. So basically, Abdullah Yameen managed to antagonize India and in a way hampered and played with the basic economic setup of Maldives as well. So when Ibrahim Soli came to power, he created the India First policy, that whatever comes, whatever situation might come, India's interest should not and would not be antagonized and would not be reversed by Maldives, and Maldivian government will be sensitive to the Indian government as well. So that was the India First policy of Ibrahim Soli. Now, Ibrahim Soli is being replaced by the new president-elect, that is Mohammad Muizzu. Now, Mohammad Muizzu has won the election on the India Out policy, that we want India and the agents of government of India out of Maldives. But you have to argue here that it is not as if India has owned certain set of islands in Maldives, as is the modus operandi of China. India basically has carried out certain developmental works. And due to that developmental works, yes, there will be presence of certain amount of engineers, contractors, etc. in a certain security personnel in order to ensure the safety of Indian people in that area. So that has been deployed in certain areas, but it is not to overwhelm the Maldivian policy. And that is something that Mohammad Muizzu has raised and had raised as an electoral plank and has won on it. But here the article argues that, look, the election is not only based upon India and China. Election is based on a lot of domestic factors as well. So when we talk about the path ahead for the new Maldivian government, the empowerment of the Abdullah Yameen group is happening. That is, the pro-China group is happening already. Abdullah Yameen has been moved from a full-scale prison to under house arrest, right? Chances are going ahead into the future, his term or his sentence might be ended, and he might find his way again back to the power. And on the domestic front, the government is expected to work on the developmental mechanism, whereas the developmental planks such as housing, provision of work, employment, etc. Whereas on the foreign policy, India out policy is to gain momentum, is to gain traction in the near future. So in the near future, we can expect significant amount of news headlines from the region about how China's influence is growing in that area. You will find greater amount of Chinese visits in terms of the defense vessels, the defense patrols in that area, and Indian vessels basically being sent away from that region, and that can hamper India-Maldivian relationship. But then, the argument also which has to be considered is the fact that the present geopolitical order of the world has changed quite significantly as compared to the time when Abdullah Yameen was in power. When Abdullah Yameen was in power, Belt and Road Initiative, that program by Xi Jinping, was still gaining ascendancy. People across the world, the governments, especially the weaker economies across the world, were still finding the Belt and Road Initiative as their ticket to success, as their ticket which will help them develop infrastructural facilities to the best of the world and with no repercussions at all. But now the geopolitics of the world has changed. Very close to Maldives lies the country of Sri Lanka, which has basically beared the brunt of that Chinese policy of Belt and Road Initiative. You also have the example of Pakistan, which is basically going through a kind of a bankruptcy phase because of, again, the Belt and Road Initiative. So Chinese policies have shown some significant amount of weaknesses. So the present geopolitical order, also represented by the Global South, India being a vehement and a significant voice of the Global South, has changed the perception and should change the perception in that region. Now, the article also argues that one of the most vehement opponents of India is basically the large Islamist constituency in Maldives, which always holds a kind of an anti-India opinion, and that has periodically been fueled by our western neighbor, that is Pakistan, with the help of the various different information propaganda, etc. But then, presently, India has got a very strong relationship with almost all the Gulf nations. And the Gulf nations, the Mid East nations and the West Asian nations, they have a stronger inclination to increase the relationship with India, improve the relationship with India, because they are not seeing Pakistan as a reliable partner because of economic bankruptcy and also because of the political instability. India has gained a significantly better public opinion in terms of the West Asian economies, the West Asian Gulf powers, etc. And that has got to soothe the Islamist constituency as well. But then again, we cannot expect the constituency to immediately upend its view about India. It will take some time. So what is it that India needs to do? After all, we cannot leave and abandon this, that, okay, now till this government is there, we won't have any relationship. That is not how politics and diplomacy works. So what is it that India can do? Basically, development of people-to-people connect and contact needs to be there. You have thousands of Maldivian nationals who have come to India for various different skill upgradation, etc. So that people-to-people contact and connect is a kind of a soft diplomacy, is the projection of soft power of India, right? And that is something which should be pursued. We need to be spending much more amount of resources when it comes to boost to developmental work such as hospitals, schools, community centers, student ferries between islands. We need to carry on that process because eventually when we develop the country to the south of us, now that development will lead to better trade relationship as well going ahead into the future. So indirectly we will also benefit from that. And on the perception scale, because democracies largely work on perception. So on the perception scale as well, if India is seen to be working on the developmental requirements, it will bring about a positive image of the country. Now, India has been the first responder and a friend in need in terms of various calamities. Ever since the time of the various different cyclones, water crisis which have hit Maldives, India has been a kind of a first responder. India needs to continue that. And India should not have any kind of prejudice when it comes to the new government. It is a different matter altogether that the new governmental policies which the new government, that is Mohammad Muizzu's government, will bring about, that significantly will define what New Delhi's path of action will be. But this is something which is advisable going into the future as per the article. Other than that, India can also ensure that a greater amount of multilateralism involving Maldives is promoted. For example, the Colombo Security Conclave. Now, this is again relevant for your prelims. So, this is relevant for your prelims. What do we mean, or what are the countries which are part of the Colombo Security Conclave? That is a conclave which works on maritime security and improving the blue economy set up in the region. So this consists of 6 member nations, that is India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Mauritius and Seychelles. So these are the various different 6 member nations of the Colombo Security Conclave. So this is something that India should work upon and strengthen. India should strengthen greater participation of these nations in ensuring a much prosperous blue economy in the Indian Ocean region. At the same time, India should also invite Maldives in the next BIMSTEC summit as a kind of an observer member and an observer nation as well. You had the recently concluded the BIMSTEC summit in Kolkata, which happened in 2023. Now, what is that BIMSTEC? That can also be relevant for your prelims, by the way. So when we talk about BIMSTEC, so it is Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation, which was created as a result of the 1997 Bangkok Declaration, right? So it was a result of this particular declaration. Member nations: Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Myanmar and Thailand. These are basically the members of BIMSTEC. Now, areas of cooperation from trade and investment to energy to people contact to agriculture, that is what multi-sectoral cooperation is about. That in various sectors, that cooperation is sought and development is being thought about. So that is BIMSTEC. Already, because of a kind of almost irrelevance of SAARC, growing irrelevance of SAARC, India has been focusing more upon BIMSTEC, and that is where India should be inviting Maldives also. When Maldives becomes part of the various multilateral groups formed by and led by India, already that will be a step forward. Okay, now moving ahead to the next article, that is, we need evidence-based traditional medicine. Now, this has appeared in page 7, relevant for your GS paper 3. Now, what is it about? This is relevant for your GS 3. So, the relevance of it is basically about the fact that when we talk about oftentimes the discussion which happens between whether we should follow modern medicinal system or should we follow a traditional medicinal system such as, let's say, Ayurveda. Now, there is not significant amount of trust on either sides. The proponents of Ayurveda, basically they have an argument that, look, everything, all the modern medicinal advancements and discoveries and inventions which have been made, Ayurveda had thought about it thousands of years ago itself. So we don't need any modern scientific advancement to look into. We have our Ayurvedic systems, and that is only that we will follow. Whereas on the other hand, the proponents of modern medicine, they completely discount any kind of generational knowledge, a kind of a traditional source of information and knowledge, and the wellness mechanism as propagated by medicines or medicinal systems such as Ayurveda. So both of them, they significantly always counter each other. But this article argues that, look, it is not a matter of countering each other, it is a matter of understanding. When we talk about modern medicine, largely the misconception is that allopathy is considered to be a part of modern medicine. But that is not the case. Allopathy basically is a term which was devised in the 1800s, and that has got nothing to do with the modern system of medicine. The modern system of medicine is dependent upon or is based upon the empirical evidences and also the evidence-based investigation as indicated by the various different scientific advancements and technological developments. So here, modern medicine is not allopathy. right? Modern medicine, here modernity refers to that scientific temperament. Modernity refers to that finding and that idea that any kind of scientific advancement and research done today can be falsified maybe 10 years from now, maybe tomorrow itself. Based upon newer evidences and newer researches, it can be possible that today's scientific researches can be falsified. So there is always a penchant to ask more questions. There is always a tendency to investigate the already known opinion and to find a better mechanism in the process. That is what modern medicine is about. So here, it became science-based only in the 19th century with the advancement of science and understanding of the human body. Now, this modern medicine is also mostly, you will hear from your surrounding as well, from many of the people in the society as well, that it is regarded as a Western system of medicine. And that is why there is a kind of a prejudice, there is a kind of a notion that Western system of medicine, it damages the body. So the article argues that the Western system, the terminology Western system of medicine, that in itself is purely a geographical connotation. It is not as if this particular medicine system has got to do anything with the traditional knowledge system which existed in the West. No. Just the fact that scientific renaissance and the phase of industrial revolution and the scientific development in the Western powers, that happened in the 1800s and the 1900s. Why? Because these were the nations which were economically well developed. These were the nations which were economically prosperous. So that is why they had the propensity, they had the wherewithal to carry out these scientific advancements and researches. And based upon those researches, modern medicine gains its genesis, modern medicine gains its basis. So that is where development of scientific temper and continued refinement in the level of understanding of how the human body basically functions. What are the intricacies in the various aspects of human body function? That is the important part of modern medicine, right? It is Western only in terms of geography, not in terms of the traditional sources of knowledge. It is not the case that the modern system of medicine basically has taken the information from the Greeks or the Roman scriptures or the older Mayan scriptures like that. No. It is simply based on technological advancement which has happened in the West due to economic development of the West. Okay? And it is based on the principle that science always self-corrects. Science always advances and self. Now, this particular argument that it can self-correct itself, that is very important. And that is where the traditional proponents of the traditional medicine system, they need to learn something from there. Because the proponents and the basic advocates of the traditional method of medicine is that they have an argument that, look, everything that the modern sciences know, the scriptures knew it thousands of years back. Where is the evidence of all that knowledge? It is lost in the scriptures, but whatever information we have indicates to us that the level of understanding was much higher. Now that in itself is based on a lot of presumptions. It is based on the presumption that what was understood 2000 years back, our own human capacity right now is less than that. Now that is very self-damaging for the advancement of traditional medicine system, right? So the issue with the traditional sources is it is constrained by the lack of understanding of human body due to lack of available technology. We don't have enough available technology, in the sense technological setup which is used for the Ayurvedic medicine practitioners. They have significantly not used technological advancements which have happened across the world in order to advance their own prognosis and diagnostic systems. It has led to a lack of path-breaking research, any new combinations or any new medicinal setup that has not come by with the empirical evidence that yes, it indeed can cure a certain kind of a disease within so many days, within so many dosage, it can bring about a kind of a improvement in symptoms. Largely, almost all these traditional systems of medicine, they are thought to be a kind of wellness generators, that they can induce wellness, well-being, but not curing certain disease. And that is a conception which has been brought about due to lack of proper researches and lack of proper investigative mechanism in these medicine systems. Still works in isolation. Lack of knowledge synthesis, because we have multiple advancements in the areas of science, physics, chemistry, biology, etc. Now, for example, when you take a look at the history of the Nobel Prizes given in chemistry, physics, many of the times that technology is used for medicinal purposes, right? So that cross synthesis of knowledge from one parameter to the other parameter, that is lacking. And that needs to be brought about. Now, a great disservice by the proponents who claim that everything was already known. This hampers future development. Any future development. Okay? As indicated, there is a significant lack of empirical evidences to indicate the benefit of various different combinations. And also, there's a need to bring in investigational method of analysis in analyzing the various medicines and the combinations. Because in Ayurvedic practice or in the Ayurvedic practice, you would generally observe that what is prescribed is a combination of various herbs, a combination of various different natural sources. Now, is that combination really relevant? Will that have any kind of side effect in any part of the body? If no, why so? If it is beneficial, to what extent? Is it something that you need to carry out perpetually or up till what date? So that investigation needs to be carried out. And only then can it be made more reliable, more trustworthy. So way forward, need to shun ignorant denouncing of the traditional medicine. Need to utilize the generational knowledge. Right? You cannot end up ignoring the method of traditional medicine by saying that, look, modern medicine system is there and we don't need the Ayurvedic practitioners anymore. They basically represent a rudimentary point of view. They represent an archaic knowledge set. No. That denouncing of the traditional medicine is a great disservice to what? To the generational information, that generational idea of wellness, which has been passed over for thousands of years. Scientific evidences have indicated that Chinese medicine system, again 1600-year-old or more than that, that has helped in developmental work of the malarial vaccine as well. So the modern medicine can also benefit from that traditional knowledge, right? Provided they are looked into, they are researched into, they are worked into. Evidence-based appraisal of all traditional medicine system needs to happen and facilitate the merger of modern information with the medicinal development. And now this has to be done at the side of the Ministry of Ayush, where you have the various different educational institutions and research institutions which are being established for these traditional medicine systems. They should not only be restricted to reviving the traditionalism. They should be associated with carrying path-breaking scientific researches. That is where the ministry and the government's role comes in. And also, many of the times, we basically think about relying upon the Ayurvedic medicinal system to the kind of having that nationalistic fervor. So this article also argues that as long as we keep on mixing that traditional medicinal system with the aspect of nationalism, we are doing disservice in terms of its future development. So that needs to be decoupled. Medicine system needs to be looked into what it is and how it should be dealt with. Okay? Now moving on to the next article, and that is about a detailed analysis of the works, basically of Claudia Goldin, who has been given the Nobel Prize. Now that Nobel Prize has been given for having advanced our understanding of women's labor market outcomes. Now, Claudia Goldin is well known for her detailed research and a greater amount of understanding that she has basically carried out for the past 200 years of American economic setup and tried to understand the labor force participation. And when is it that the labor force participation decreased or increased? So the general perception in the mindset has always been that, look, economic advancement as it would have happened, female labor force participation would have directly increased. So the general perception is that the labor force participation when it comes to the females, that would have increased linearly or had indicated a linearity in terms of participation. But her findings indicate something to the contrary. Her findings indicate that there is a kind of a U-shaped curve when it comes to the female labor force participation, in the sense that as the economies they transitioned from being agrarian to industrial, that marked a dip in the female labor force participation. And again, with the advent of the service sector industry, the labor force participation again started to increase. That is her research, and that is her analysis based upon the past researches. Now, she has also indicated that with the rise of the service sector industry, it is in this phase of economic growth and development that there has been a rise in the pay inequality, income inequality as well. Income inequality in the sense that for the same work, men are paid much more than their women counterparts. So the rise of the service economy has given rise to economy, has led to income inequality as well. Now, why this article is relevant is because look, even when we talk about the South Asian economies, particularly countries like India, there also we face the same problem, in the sense that we still have almost 50% of our population who are directly or indirectly dependent on agriculture. And with growing aspect of service sector economy and growing relevance of the industrial sector as well, there has been a change in the labor force participation. Already various surveys have indicated that post-COVID, female labor force participation has declined quite considerably. In India, we are staring at a female labor force participation of close to around 27 to 28%. Whereas in China, that labor force participation is a staggering 61%. And that is a significant contributor not only for economic progress of a particular society of a nation, but also the general upliftment in terms of the social awareness, the various different social indicators of health, all of them directly or indirectly find their correlation with the female labor force participation. That is why her study becomes much more pertinent and important and relevant in the present day and age. So here, what has been her finding when the economy progressed from agrarian to industrial era? While the general perception would have been that from agrarian to industrial, there would be an increase in labor force participation, but the findings indicated something to the contrary, that female labor force participation decreased with industrialization. And there have been certain reasons for that. In the case when you had agrarian sector of economy being very functional, now women and the female labor force, they basically, women of household, they could carry out that activity, that economic activity in their own backyard. They could tend to their fields in their own backyard, and they could be a part of that economic progress. With industrialization came upon centers of development. Mahatma Gandhi had always argued that this centers of development which is developed due to the industrial policies, that is a leading cause of unemployment and inequality across the world, right? So her work also indicates something similar, that with industrialization, it made it harder for the women to work from home. And it was not always easy for them to be traveling very significantly long distances in order to pursue work, because the expectations that society had from them, it was very difficult to fulfill, having taken care of the family as well as ensuring some amount of economic output. Now, the article also argues, and her works over the period of time have also argued, that such expectations are not held from the male counterparts. It is only from the female counterparts that you have these expectations. And it incorrectly assessed the census data. Basically, the census data which was calculated, which was ensured, enumerated in the late 1800s, they did not manage to capture properly the women participation in labor force, in the sense that employment rate for the married woman was 3 times higher as compared to the census data. Why is that? And that is something which indicates to you a larger sense of ignorance in the society, which is prevalent even today. Because the census data of that time indicated a section as wife, right, under occupation. Now, any household chores, any kind of domestic in the sense of other work such as storekeeping, bookkeeping, etc., they were completely regarded under the duty of being the wife. Now that in itself basically tells you that their economic contribution was minimalized quite significantly. Now after that, there had been an upward trajectory in the 20th century, and that is because of the growth of the service sector. Also brought about an increased idea of knowledge, increased level of education which was gained by women from various different strata, and that increase in education basically provided them the opportunity to come back to the level of employment even after taking breaks when it came to the birth of the newborn or tending to the family. Now, growth of the service sector gave rise to income inequality as well, and significant change in the labor force participation was observed with the introduction of birth control pills, because now women could basically plan their family and accordingly prioritize the aspect of family as well as their own economic independence. But here also, the argument is that the expectation is much larger. The onus of expectation is much larger on the women even today, because they are expected to have both the things managed together, whereas for the men, the expectation is only to cater to the economic setup. Now, gender equity at household level has also improved in the past century almost, where there has been a greater participation by even the male members in the domestic chores, and that has led to a greater level of independence and freedom for the women to pursue what they want. So these are basically the learnings that we as a country we can also inculcate, that look, there are certain debilitating factors which put women on the back seat when it comes to labor force participation. And as various reports from from the International Monetary Fund to the reports generated by World Bank, all of them have indicated that India's path to success in the next century lies with greater women labor force participation. So we need to ensure better education, we need to address the income inequality, we need to ensure that there is a flexibility in terms of family planning. We still have various different states in our country where a lot of women or a lot of girls basically are married below the age of 18 years. Bihar being one of those states. The recent socio-economic or basically the caste census which was released by the state of Bihar, if you analyze the intricacies of it, if you extract something other than caste of it, you will look at the very stark reality that still you have a whopping section of women and girls in these states who are married at the age less than 18. So you cannot expect them to participate in the labor force. And that is why the fertility rate is also high in these regions, giving rise to a larger population and larger population without much economic output. Okay? Now, let us take a look at few of the articles only relevant for your prelims perspective. Now, Tele-MANAS seva basically has counseled 3.5 lakh people, as was indicated by the minister. So what is this Tele-MANAS seva? So this was launched on the World Mental Health Day, and the central government announced the National Tele-Mental Health Program in the Union Budget of 2022-23 with the objective to provide counseling and help wherever required, better access to quality mental health counseling and care services across the country. Now, this was launched on the World Mental Health Day, and the nodal agency for this was NIMHANS in Bangalore. So that was the nodal agency and is still the nodal agency for carrying out the various interventions to improve mental health. Now, as per this, 24/7 mental health services that is aimed to provide universal access to affordable, equitable and quality mental health care through teleservices under National Mental Health Program. Okay, so you should be aware that what is the Tele-MANAS seva. You should be aware which is the nodal organization or the nodal hospital taking care, medical institute taking care of all this, that is NIMHANS in Bangalore. Okay, now the state-based NBFCs, the state-owned NBFCs, they have been put under the prompt corrective action. Now, prompt corrective action, what is this? PCA. So this PCA basically was launched few years back by the RBI in order to bring about a greater level of accountability in the banks, because the banking system almost a decade back was suffering from huge amount of NPAs made due to easy loans because of lack of proper KYC methods, etc. You had a burgeoning level of NPAs, and it was because of that high NPAs that India also suffered from what was famously regarded as the twin deficit issue. Now, that also put India for a long time under the lens of being termed as a fragile economy, in the sense that the banking sector was significantly fragile because of burgeoning level of NPAs. Now, under this PCA or prompt corrective action, the amount of capital which is induced or which is put forward, that is ensured. Right. So basically the promoters or the shareholders, the amount of equity that they are infusing, the type of various different types of dividends which are issued oftentimes, that is also monitored. So this is to bring about a greater amount of financial accountability. Because as we move ahead, once we have seen that due to the intervention of RBI, thankfully the banks in India, they have started regaining their health and they are indicating quite a significant amount of profitability in all the sectors as well. In fact, the revival of the banking sector in the country has been one of the success stories of the past 10 years almost 10, 12 years. But in the sense of the NBFCs, this is the next large white elephant which needs to be addressed, in the sense that this is one of those sectors which is still causing significant amount of mislending practices, significant amount of corruption practices, and large NPAs are rising on the sides of these NBFCs as well. So reduction in leverage, restrictions on taking other liabilities, asset marking, etc., and the dividend payout, everything will be ensured under the PCA. So for your prelims, you should be aware what this PCA is, and it is induced by RBI. It is basically now it will be the state-owned NBFCs will be put under the ambit of PCA. Now, India's space tech industry has downstream potential. Now, Deloitte India basically has come out with a report which indicates the various benefits that the Indian space industry is going to have. Now, when we say downstream potential, what do we mean by downstream potential? In the sense that, let's suppose if you have developed a particular kind of a technological setup or a technological proficiency, now the utility of that technological advancement that you have carried out will be utilized in communication systems, in material sciences, and in various other aspects of economy as well. And that has pegged billions of dollars worth of economic potential that the Indian space sector is going to have. So downstream is a reference to services like communication, earth imaging, and navigation facilities that the satellites provide. And the space sector, which is growing at a significant pace. Now, earlier the impediment was technological advancement. We did not possess the relevant technology for launching various different space programs, etc. Now that the technological hurdle is being overcome by, now we see a kind of the benefit, accrued benefit that we will be gaining from this. Okay. Now let us take a look at the questions which can be framed from this. So traditional methods of medicine need to be dealt with the modern methodologies to make it clinically sound and acceptable. Comment. Now see, this is a 10 marker of 150 worded answer. Had it been a 15 marker or 250 worded answer which was required, the requirement would have been different. But let me tell you the approach. First of all, when we talk about the comment here, comment does not mean that you have to stick to the argument put forward by the sentence or the statement. You can contradict that statement as well, easily so. So traditional methods of medicine need to be dealt with the modern methodologies. In the sense, we are talking about the aspect of cross verification, empirical evidences, investigative mechanism, right? Now, how do you write the answer? In the introduction, you talk about basic traditional sources of medicine, give the example of Ayurveda, Unani, etc. All of that, yoga, all of that, you give an example of that. And then after that, you talk about why is it very briefly, point-wise manner, or you can basically draw bubbles in order to improve the depiction method and visibility as well. Why is it that it has a deficit of trust or trust deficit in these medicines, right? So here you can talk about lack of proper evidences, lack of research indication, and these factors, lack of technological advancement, these are the factors that you can bring about. Now, what needs to be done? That is what the answer is about. So what needs to be done, we have already discussed. You can bring that to the table. Had this been a 250-worded answer, you could also spend some of your answer, some part of your answer, deliberating upon the fact that traditional medicine need not always stand to the crucible of the modern science. It is more about wellness as well, and it talks about propagating a kind of a way of life which is sustainable. And that method of knowledge or that system of knowledge is prevalent in various different households at various different levels. And that has been passed from generations. So it need not be put to the trial of the modern sciences always. Now that is a kind of a contradicting opinion of that. And here also you can basically summarize it in one or a couple of sentences. But then in the conclusion, you have to talk about it for larger acceptance and to ensure a better aspect and a better development and future development of traditional medicine and a better adoption of that. We need to ensure that this system of medicine stands true on all the various different tests of time, modern scientific tests being just one of them. And that has to be ensured by the government, etc. You can conclude it with the positive aspect. Okay. Now, with changing political landscape in our neighboring nation of Maldives, discuss the impact on India along with the way forward. So here you can very briefly, because it is a 15-marker question, very briefly, you can talk about the political landscape, the evolution of democracy. Generally, I would suggest to you, whenever you are basically depicting these kind of journey, depict it in the form of flowchart. Much easier for the evaluator also to grasp with that what is represented. Many of the times the candidates, they simply write it out in a paragraph fashion. That is something that the evaluator always ignores. So when you are talking about, let's suppose, the political journey or the political history of Maldives to the present day, all that you have to bring about is 5 to 6 points in certain boxes. It will make it visually appealing, more marks as well. Then talk about the impact on India, because the new government has worked on the India out policy, has won on the India out policy. There will be greater role played by China. That will hold a significant amount of geostrategic security risk to the southern part of India as well. And that is where India has to be where. Then in the later part of the answer, you have to talk about the need for multilateralism, the changing geopolitical landscape, and what is it that India needs to do going forward, going ahead to improve this relationship. And people-to-people contact will be the base of that. Okay. So with that, you can conclude the answer. I would advise and suggest to you, do write the answer, get it evaluated as well. And also, do visit the Telegram channel and do take up the questions based upon these particular analysis to judge the level of understanding from these particular topics. I hope the session was helpful and informative for you guys. We meet again tomorrow. Till that point of time, do take care of yourself. Goodbye. Thank you.